It's 10. After I ring the bell and I'll sit down here. Hello, Sue. How are you? I'm pretty good. Yeah. Well, I'm in a wager. Yeah. It's like worse. Oh, believe me. Yeah. No, Victoria, I heard you. Well, good morning and welcome everyone to the Namakwa Unitarian Universalist Congregation. Thank you to Donna Brown, a Namakwa member who is making our piano sing this morning. And thanks to Janet Gillette, the worship associate. And upstairs we have a mighty team of tech people, Doug Stewart and Don Suriani. So we are a congregation that is Unitarian Universalist. And what we like to say is that we are a people of open minds, of loving hearts, helping hands, gutsy creativity, and we have feet that walk our talk. I know that we have a few people who haven't been here in person before, and hello to all of you on Zoom. Is anyone brave enough, if you're relatively new, to raise your hand and say who you are so we can welcome you? Victoria?
Hi, should I stand up?
Yeah, just stand up. Show us your whole gutsy creativity body.
Victoria, I'm new here. I came from the small in Okeechobee area in Georgia, north border. I'm a piano teacher.
Oh,
I really enjoy Olympianism. That's part of the interest in church. South Georgia, grew up in very, very fundamentalist churches, which I'm not personally a Christian, but I really enjoy the congregation. That's it.
okay. So those of you on Zoom probably didn't hear Victoria's whole story, but she's from the Okefenokee, anyway, a swamp in Georgia. And a woman close to my heart. Were you there on Zoom for our pantheism service a couple months ago?
There were a couple of them, and I was there for one, and I found it really interesting. During the service, there was actually, I guess,
So Victoria felt a connection with someone else who was from Georgia on one of our services before. So anyway, welcome, Georgia. You can tell what kind of a group this is. Pretty warm and welcoming. So is there anyone else who has the nerve to raise your hand and introduce yourselves, or on Zoom? Of course, you can't raise your hand on Zoom, but do we have any visitors on Zoom today? Doug?
I don't see any.
Okay. Well, anyway, all of you are obviously welcome. And today's service is all about radical love. And so with no further ado, let us go ahead and begin our service officially by lighting. Oh, do you want to say something?
Church and some people for those son also. So he doesn't go and he's 6 days, so we love coming in.
Well, welcome. I did recognize you from a prior service. So we've got Bev and Steve who are kind of pinging back and forth with their son, sometimes at Foothills and sometimes here, which they say they love. So keep coming. All right. Anybody else? So let's go ahead and light our chalice.
A chalice lit in our midst, can you hear me? Okay. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome. A faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality of all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame,
It's not too tiny.
it's not real tiny. This flame is a symbol of the spark of all this within us. Come, let us worship together. And now if you will say the congregational affirmation with me, it should be in your orders of service.
Love is the spirit of this church,
and service its call.
This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And our opening hymn is in the hardback hymnal, and it is number 159. So if you'll please rise as you're willing and able, and join us in singing. Yeah. Is your microphone on? Is your green light on? This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and wide. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and vine. But other lands That's why. Oh, hear my soul, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for them and for mine. Please be seated. A very timely song. Well, I do not see any children here today, but we still do have a time for all ages. And it's very much in the spirit of the song that we just sang. I checked it out from the Loveland Library. It's called All Our Family, Celebrating the Diversity of Our Global Family. And it was written by a woman who, her name is Marissa Bloom. And when I checked it out from the library, I was delighted to see that she was here and dedicated it to the Loveland Public Library. We celebrate all families, including yours. And the illustrator is a man named Matt Kaufman, who is actually from Fort Collins. So I recommend this book to any of you who have children in your life. Some families have one child, some 3 or 4, others 5, 6, or 7. Some have even more. Some families may have 8 kids, some even 9. Others may have 20. All numbers are divine. Some families live in houses made of brick and stone. Huts of mud, straw, and wood are also called a home. Some families live as nomads. So you'll see there's a picture of camels and people in a desert. Some in apartments, condos, yurts. No matter what they're made of, these homes hold joyful hearts. Some families sleep in one big bed. So you see a picture of 4 sets of different sized feet and the head of a dog sticking out from under the covers. Or they're each own to lie. Some rest on mats, cots, or rugs, or on stilts that keep them dry. Some families sleep in bunks stacked high, or hammocks swaying light. Wherever they choose to lay their heads, they dream a peaceful night. Some families eat at tables. Some sit on the ground. Some use forks, knives, and spoons. Others pass chopsticks around. So you see here, there's a picture of a Japanese family sitting around a table on the ground, and they're drinking probably miso soup and eating sushi with chopsticks. And then some families use their hands or unleavened bread. So any of you who have participated in the Jewish tradition of Passover, we have matzahs that are unleavened bread. And then there's a picture of a platter with a beautiful display of different food and hands eating them with a kind of Eritrean sour flatbread called injera. With this food prepared in love, good cheer is often spread. So you see a big buffet table surrounded by people that are loading up their plates with tortillas and beans and rice. Some families have a mom and dad, some 1 or 2 of each. Grandparents, uncles, cousins, aunts, love within arm's reach. So Frances and my sons, Marcus and David, they had 2 moms. And our grandson, Henry, has 3 grandmothers. So here we have a picture of a big city park with groups of people sitting on picnic baskets, People are walking and talking and playing Frisbee. Some families may look shorter. Some families might seem tall. Hair, skin, eyes, colorful hues. Wisdom sees beauty in all. Some families' clothes look different, the fabric which they wear. However they choose to cover themselves, there's always a person in there. And finally, some families speak your language, some a foreign tongue. Although our words sound different, as humans, we are one. All families are unique, as you can plainly see. Among the things we hope to share are love, respect, and empathy. Bravo. Bravo to Marissa. And so a great message. And I do encourage any of you who have kids maybe to consider checking it out, because then there's a list of questions at the back that you can talk with your children or grandchildren or friends about. If there were kids, we'd sing them to the religious education. So Jan, you get to stay with us today. Now I do hear ocean. Yeah. Well, for joys and sorrows today, wow, do we have some joys. Wow. And I will start with Tracy. So Tracy Jones, it's kind of a miracle that she's here today because of the health challenges that you've had. But I also hear that it is Tracy and George's 8th anniversary.
Ooh.
So our tradition here is to symbolize our empathy with you. So that is truly a joy that you're here, and happy anniversary to you and George. So does anybody have birthdays or other people have your anniversaries that you're celebrating around now? If so, maybe raise your hand. So we've got Sarah.
Donna and I had our 30th wedding anniversary this week, and Lizzie had her 20th.
Wow. I remember the coincidence of those two joys. So happy anniversary to you and Dawn. And please tell Lizzie happy birthday for us. And Nancy? So next Thursday, happy birthday to you, Nancy.
We'll go out for margaritas.
How about on Zoom? Anybody with birthdays or anniversaries?
Nobody yet.
Nobody yet, okay. And how about anybody who would like to come up or have me pass a microphone to you to share a personal joy or sorrow with our community? I'm going to come to you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Milton. It's been a little while since we've been here, but I'm here with my son Elliot, who is 16 and spent the last month in the hospital. He came down with Guillain-Barré syndrome, where your immune system attacks your nerves, and it caused complete total paralysis. He couldn't swallow, he couldn't breathe, he couldn't walk. We spent 3.5 weeks in the pediatric ICU. And they told us it was going to probably be 6 to 12 months before he would walk again. And he has blown everybody away and is doing much better than expected.
We are so happy to have you here. Here, let me put a few stones in for this.
Okay, this is the, hang on. I need to hang on a second. Okay, my name is Mim, and I'm really glad I'm sitting next to Marion today because we both used to go to the Unity Temple, and then I went to the Unitarian Church of Evanston. And a mutual friend of ours, Betty, is attending this afternoon a memorial service for her her only living son, except of course he died in a car crash.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
she lost one son to suicide. She lost her husband to diabetes, and now she's lost Keith.
Oh, my gosh.
And her name is Betty, and she needs any love you can send to her. Actually, we all. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So we send our prayers and sympathies and comfort to Betty. It's hard. So anybody else?
We have someone on Zoom,
Okay. Can you
and
read?
yeah, Karen Massaro says that she has an appointment with the cardiologist tomorrow. And please send kind thoughts. I'm hoping the cardiologist can provide some answers to her health concerns of the past 7 months.
So Karen Massaro, a member who lives in Johnstown, who's seeing a cardiologist. I hope that they can figure out what's going on, Karen.
Yeah.
And remember, you owe me some apple strudel, right? You reminded me of that. Anybody else on Zoom, Doug? Okay. And we always put in a few extra, knowing that some of you may feel either too shy to speak up, or maybe what you would want to share is too tender. And I'm just going to put them all in.
Yeah.
And we have here some candles, well, that are representing the joys and sorrows beyond our community. And I'd like you now to join me. You can stay seated, but to sing a musical response, which in a way is a form of prayer. Comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Sing with me, sing with me, sing with me, oh my soul. Yes. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Dance with me, dance with me, dance with me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul. Comfort me, comfort me, comfort me, oh my soul.
Radical. What do you think of radical? It's a kind of a powerful word. I think it's something that most people think is outside the envelope, or something that most people can't or won't do. Eating bugs or jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. When it comes to radical love, it's actually a bigger task. It's easy to love people who love you. But what about people who feel the opposite way? What about people who hurt you? Laurel will give us a big picture of radical love. I'm going to give you a little one. You know, one of our UU sources is the Bible. That may be unexpected by folks not acquainted with us, but at its core, some of us see the Bible as a collection of books, of poetry, apocryphal stories, healing, and mythology. One of the most famous stories attributed to Jesus, who is all right with me, is that of the Good Samaritan. The phrase is almost always misconstrued and misused. You know the story. One guy gets mugged out in the middle of nowhere, and a bunch of people who recognize him walk by without helping, when a stranger stops and saves him. Now, the takeaway for most people is that the helper was a stranger, so we should help strangers. Nice thought, but not a stretch. Most of us would do that without thinking. We don't have to be told. But here's the intended takeaway of that story. The person who stopped to help was not a completely unknown person. He was recognizable as a member of the opposing army. Samaritans and Nazarenes were sworn enemies. They hated each other. Think about your enemies. It could be anyone from your obnoxious neighbor to Vladimir Putin. If you came upon either one of them lying in the road, beaten to a pulp and left for dead, what would you do? Now, I'm sure that many of us, our first answer would be, maybe kick them. No, I think most people would instinctively stop and help without thinking. I'll give you a personal example. And this is not to brag about how kind I am. It's just the truth about what happened when I was put in that position. I once bought a house on a developing cul-de-sac on a hill. It was the first house built, so I had no idea who the neighbors would be. A couple, when the next house was built, next door, up the hill from me, a couple and their two young boys, barely more than toddlers, moved in. Now, these little children were holy terrors, and the adults were insane. The man of the house would be the nice neighbor one day. Hey, Janet, beautiful day, isn't it? Next day, I'd hear him and turn around and look, and he's got a shovel ready to bash my head in. Yeah, with no provocation, I just run in the house, you know. I was Catholic at the time, and I talked to a priest about it. He told me that Jesus said, love your neighbor. You don't have to like them. Love and hate are decisions, not feelings. Well, this advice was soon tested. One day, the neighbors pulled a moving truck up to their house, but instead of parking in the driveway, they parked on the street. They left these two little darlings in the truck while they went, bless you, into the house for something. One of the kids was apparently hit the gear shift, knocking it into neutral. The truck flew down the hill, through a fence, and landed in the house down the hill from us. I was furious that these so-called adults had done such an irresponsible thing. What to do when people I would not give the time of day suffered injury? Well, I didn't think about it. Without thinking, I ran to the linen closet, grabbed some blankets. I ran down to the truck and wrapped these bloody little boys and tried to comfort them. Obviously, this was not a thought out decision. I didn't wonder what to do. I acted on instinct, and I helped my fellow human beings. I did not like them, but I loved them radically. May it be so.
Thanks, Janet. So will the ushers please come forward? We have Tam and Nancy today. And our half-plate recipient, Namakwa, shares its collection each quarter with a local nonprofit. And I understand that Connie was here last week from Saint Senior Alternatives in Transportation, and even had a question and answer session with you all. So you know who you're giving to. Please be generous and enjoy another song by Donna Brown. So ushers, come forward and we'll bless our offering. You're good. So please repeat after me. We dedicate ourselves, and these are offerings.
We dedicate ourselves, and these are offerings,
To the vision of this congregation,
to the vision of this congregation,
which is to radiate love, peace, and justice.
which is to radiate love, peace, and justice.
As together we work to grow beloved community.
As together we work to grow a beloved community.
I am very aware that I only have 6 more services with you before I leave. And I'm being intentional about the messages that I'm leaving you with. These are my last opportunities to share my thoughts with you, as I've been doing for the last almost 11 years. And I regard our Sunday services as sparking a continuing conversation between and among and even beyond this pulpit and the pews and those of you on Zoom. I hope that what you think about, reflect about, are challenged by, are comforted by here spills out into the other relationships that you have, the other places you go in your life. And with the privilege that you've given me as your minister, I see myself as a kind of a sower. So my job is to scatter seeds, and some of them will take root and sprout, others may lie dormant. I spread seeds of stories and of thoughts and of values. And I do this not to impose my thoughts and values on you, but to offer them for your consideration. So maybe each Sunday you can ask yourself, do these stories and thoughts and values strike you as true? Are they relevant to how you live your daily life? Do they help you be a better person? Perhaps they remind you of something important that really you already know. Or perhaps sometimes you disagree with me, and that's fine. Remember, we do not have to think alike to love alike. And our covenant with one another is strong enough to hold us even if we disagree, even when we're in the midst of a struggle. So looking back at the binders I have of probably 350 sermons that I've done over these last years, I'd like to share one from a few years ago. It's an important message that is one of the ones I'd like to leave you with, and it's about the power of radical love. Quote, consider the following scenario. You are an opposition leader in a deeply divided nation. Against all odds, you narrowly win a local election against a ruling party that controls the public space and censors the media. You become a mayor of the country's largest city. Under government pressure, however, the authorities rule that the vote was rigged and deposed you from office. What do you do? This is how Melvin Ingleby began an article that he wrote. It was actually back in 2019 for The Atlantic. And Ingleby is a journalist who is based in Istanbul. He was writing about a dilemma that the now ousted mayor of Istanbul, who was Ekrem İmamoğlu, was facing. Because against all odds, İmamoğlu had narrowly won the election against Binali Yildirim. And Yildirim was the longtime confident and chosen candidate of Turkey President Erdogan and his ruling Justice and Development Party. After recounting the votes, failed to secure a victory for Yildirim, the ruling party claimed that polling station officials had for some reason only altered the mayoral election results. All the other local races that these officials had supervised and tabulated were left intact. So İmamoğlu's victory was overturned under circumstances that were clearly corrupt and unjust. So I want to ask you, does this sound a little bit familiar?
Yeah.
So what do you do now? A lot of people feared that İmamoğlu's furious supporters would respond with street protests or even violence. But the night that İmamoğlu was deposed from office, listen to what he said. Quote, they will want conflict from us. They will want to hear harsh words from us. But we, the people who do not want this nation to fight, who want this nation to embrace, we will insist upon embracing each other. So instead of keeping the polarization and hostility alive with confrontational approaches, he told his supporters, find a neighbor who doesn't think like you and just give them a big hug. So this rare politician, after that, he took the streets of Istanbul with a strategy of uniting voters around a slogan of disarming optimism. He said, everything will be fine. We are showing that walls can be torn down. We can win with love. And not with just ordinary love, with what he called radical love. So I just wonder, and this is a perpetual question, certainly for me, and I imagine for all of you, is can walls really be torn down with love? Or can a war really be stopped with love? Is it possible that power with can actually win against power over? Because we certainly have a world that is dominated by power over. So I believe that for us to walk our talk, for us to live up to our principles, especially right now, we at least need to try. We need to try to embody radical love. So the first principle of Unitarian Universalism affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And then the seventh principle affirms that we are all connected in the interdependent web of all existence. So we are both independent with worth and dignity, and we are interdependent. We really need each other to survive, especially on this small blue-green planet. So these are not easy principles to apply. And in our global world, Russia continues to brutally attack Ukraine. Our country continues to be deeply divided. And maybe a little bit closer to home, there's unresolved tension and division right now between us and our UU neighbor to the north. And I'm even in a conflict with my professional organization that, as I think most of you know, recently suspended my membership. So these are real struggles. So how can we respond with radical love? So I think that if you've been a UU for long and you are a person who strives to live with integrity, that you know how hard it is sometimes to apply this first principle. As Janet said, maybe you don't like everyone, but maybe you can still act with radical love. So how do you see the worth and dignity in Vladimir Putin? Does he have that spark of the divine? You know, as a pantheist or panentheist, I do see the divine everywhere, but I have to look really hard sometimes. So how can we see the worth and dignity in people who hold on to views so different from ours, and especially those who have power? And how do we see the worth and dignity in people who hurt us? Would it really work to hug them? Maybe not literally, but it is important to try to find a way to lower the heat and to stay in relationship, even if you disagree. And this is, I think, truer in our personal lives than in our political lives, probably. But how can we reach out and build a new relationship sometimes, seeking for common ground? So there were a couple of years ago, Krista Tippett, who's the host of the On Being podcast, she was a speaker at the General Assembly of the Unitarians a couple of years ago. So she had an interview with Francis Kissling. And I find this interview something that points us in a helpful direction. So do you know who Francis Kissling is? So she is a scholar and an activist. And she's actually controversial on both sides of the abortion debate, but she is seen also as a bridge builder. She is a longtime pro-choice activist who has mightily sought to build relationships with her political opposites. She speaks of goodwill and understanding rather than agreement or victory. She speaks of bridges between differences, or like that book that I just read, that children's book of celebrating diversity. So here's what she said about struggles with people with whom we disagree. Quote, "You've got to be willing to risk in order to make change. You've got to approach differences with the notion that there is good somewhere in the other. You need to refuse to see the other as evil." And she says, that's it. If we can't figure out how to do that, if there isn't any crack in the middle, the disagreement is going to continue. So remember the crack in the middle. That's the common ground. That's the little light that we can follow in order to try to see whether there's a way to build a bridge. So to simply believe that there's good in the other offers us the crack in the middle where we can find common ground. And radical love, what radical love does is invite us to have the courage to step into that crack, to take the risk, to be brave enough to step into that holy place and to ask, what hurts? Because so many times underneath disagreements, and especially when it's an emotionally charged issue, what there is underneath is pain and fear. And actually, I want to praise our board. 3 members of the Namakwa board have begun a series of conversations with 3 members of the Foothills board to try to find some common ground and to ask one another what hurts and to see if we can become good neighbors, as I think all of us would like to be. So thank you, board. You know, every day I have prayed, actually, during this whole conflict. As you know, I have cards that I put on my altar, and every morning I light my candle and I gently touch and focus on each card. Some of them, it's easy for my heart to pour out love, and some of them it is very challenging, but that is my commitment, is to look for that spark of the divine and to just hold on to that hope that we'll be able to seek and find some kind of reconciliation. We do not have to think alike to love alike. So the remarkable thing about the story I was telling you about Imamoglu and the 2019 election in Turkey, do any of you remember who heard this sermon a number of years ago? He won. So his radical love worked. He reached out to the supporters of the government that had pushed to depose him. He took to the streets and visited mosques, and he told his supporters to avoid attacking Erdogan or insulting Erdogan's supporters, and instead, he told his supporters to talk less and to listen more. By implementing what I think of as an audacious political strategy of radical love in response to the attacks and the corruption and the manipulation, in the rerun of the election, he actually won. And he's still the mayor of Istanbul. And I've read recently, I don't know that he would win, but he's even being talked about as a potential presidential candidate. So this winning new campaign strategy comes from a 50-page pamphlet called The Book of Radical Love. And the writer is named Atis Ilya Basoy, and he devised this strategy and explained why it works. So listen to this. He saw that people cannot change Erdogan. So the way that they fight is by changing ourselves. If you want to defeat Erdogan, he said, you need to ignore him and love those people who love him. So Basoy's strategy of radical love is based on empathy. Remember, empathy is one of those 3 things that was the key of that children's book, is love, respect, and empathy. So this is one of the values in that book, and celebrating the diversity of our global family with love, respect, and empathy is a really good place to start. Like Helen Rice, who is the author of The Empathy Effect, Besoy realized that the decline of empathy, and it is in decline, is because of social media. Communicating electronically through text, emails, and social media posts, the constant use of cell phones has drastically impaired our attention spans and our ability to engage in face-to-face conversation. Can any of you relate to that? I know that I use email and texts. I don't post often on social media, but it's really true. And what we're doing, actually, even though you're not talking right now, we are communicating face-to-face, even those of you on Zoom. In a way, we're communicating face-to-face. That can be revolutionary. So the form of communication in social media creates a shallow society that is pervaded by a sense of restlessness and, ironically, loneliness. And in turn, these feelings stimulate anxieties and fear. And in the realm of politics, these feelings of anxiety and fear actually have political consequences. At least in part, they account for the surge of populist polarization that we see around the entire world. And to create and inflame this polarization, politicians use strategies of distraction and disorientation, stirring up division, and then presenting a strong leader as the answer to this hunger for security and stability. Besoy sought to understand how to interrupt what he calls this dance of polarization, because it does take two to polarize. So he was inspired by a book by Daniel Kahneman. Have you seen this one, Thinking Fast and Slow? And in the last 20 years, he says in this book that things have changed so rapidly, in fact, more rapidly than at any other time in humanity's history. And yet at the same time, we humans still grow the same way. So we have little Ocean there, who's just a baby. And as he develops, he's still going to be a baby and then a toddler and then a child and growing into be a teen and then a young adult. So humans still develop the same way, but in the meantime, change is just at an astronomical pace right now. And in our radically changing world, there are those who create fear. Fear of people who are different, the us-them mentality. And so the frightened people submit to their leaders who can, as Besoy puts it, direct these feelings like an orchestra conductor. That strikes me as so true, and it is terrifying. So if we don't slow down and take time to pause and to look deeply at ourselves and at others, and at who is pulling the strings, who is conducting the orchestra, we need to realize when we are being manipulated. And if underneath that vulnerability to manipulation is anxiety and fear, one of the best things that we can do is to try to keep ourselves grounded and to do things like, I hope, coming to church on Sundays and being part of a community like this, giving you a feeling that you belong and that there are people who care about you. We can't do things maybe on a global scale, but we can do things in our circle of influence and in our individual lives. So the kind of division and polarization that Imamoglu faced in Turkey is familiar here in the United States as we continue to struggle with the important issues, a divisive issue even of global warming, as well as highly charged issues. We've been dealing with gay marriage, with abortion, with voting rights. censorship. Well, during the campaign in Turkey, the pro-government media outlets tried to smear Imamoglu as a terrorist sympathizer or an undercover Greek. But when he kept turning the other cheek, refusing to take the bait, these attempts to stoke polarization were ineffective. So going back to turning the other cheek, not reacting in a way that you're digging in and making the situation worse. So I will end by sharing a realization that has changed the way that I watch and respond to the news. In an article about radical love in the Journal of Democracy, Besoy explains the dynamic of polarization. When one side of a polarized situation responds to every move that the leader of the other side makes, they often end up projecting their disdain for the leader's crude rhetoric or moral misconduct on his supporters as well. Again, does that sound kind of familiar? This tends to foster derogatory and patronizing assumptions about the group of voters from the other side who are often lumped together and derided for their lack of enlightenment and education. So instead of disdain, radical love would have campaigners respect everyone's identity and religious beliefs and avoid arrogance at all costs. So here's my confession, is that I have certainly felt disdain for leaders. And I know that I have sometimes, in fact, probably often, painted the supporters of those leaders I disdain with the same feeling of disdain. So I, who am a minister in a faith that begins with the first principle affirming the worth and dignity of every person, I, as a minister who truly believe in the theology that we are all connected, we are all part of the interdependent web of existence, that we need one another to survive. I'm guilty of having polarizing thoughts, and I have fallen into the trap of feeling arrogant. And I've sometimes felt too cowardly, too afraid to step into the gap and to explore to see whether we might have common ground with the people who I am pushing away with that kind of disdain. So what I'm committing myself to is to try to find empathy and to do everything I can to open my heart to some kind of compassion. And again, I think one of the keys is understanding that so much of what ignites that kind of polarization is fear and pain, is suffering. And I think that is part of the human condition. And that might be something that would help us see the humanity of people who we disagree with. So for us UUs to walk our talk when many of us are overwhelmed, I know I feel helpless sometimes. You know, you can only donate a certain amount of money to causes that we are supporting, to support Ukraine, to do Tonglen, which I think when we have our evensong in the middle of this month, it's going to be a midweek service where we can come together in the sanctuary with a low light and be quiet with each other. I would like to do a Tonglen exercise where you breathe in the pain of other people and you can breathe out compassion, that they be relieved from that pain. So as we reemerge from the 2 years of isolation because of the pandemic and begin to rebuild, and then as we all in our different ways prepare for the transitions that are ahead of us, me retiring after a lifetime of work, this being my very favorite position that I've ever held in my life, and you all preparing to let me go and to enter into a 2-year interim period. Leonard Sokolowski sitting in the front pew here is helping us find or helping you find an interim minister. And then after that, to actually call a new person to be your minister. So as we face these changes, what are we to do? I would say that every day, step by step, in every way, I recommend that we embody our vision of radiating radical love, peace, and justice. So may love guide us. And may it be so. And oh, what a coincidence. Our next song, our closing song, number 131, is called Love Will Guide Us.
Wow, imagine that.
So imagine that. So please rise as you're willing and able.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us, leading the way on the road from free to giving. Love will guide us through the dark night.
Remain standing as we extinguish our chalice.
Unitarian Universalists have said for centuries that there is room in our religion for all seekers. Skeptics, poets, and scientists are welcome here, as are nonconformists and shy, uncertain folks. We believe that restlessness and doubts are a sign of grace, that the love of truth is the holiest of gifts.
And our benediction is from Mother Teresa. She says, do not think that love, in order to be genuine, has to be extraordinary. What we need is to love without getting tired. How does a lamp burn? Through the continuous input of small drops of oil. If the oil runs out, the light of the lamp will cease. So what are these drops of oil in our lamps? They are the small things of daily life. Faithfulness, punctuality, small words of kindness, a thought for others, our way of being silent, of looking, of speaking, and of acting. These are the true drops of love. Be faithful in small things, because it is in them that your strength lies. So a few just really quick announcements. One thing is that some of us are wearing masks and others not. And I think you noticed last week when the choir was here that they weren't wearing masks. The positivity rate is still high enough that we are erring on the side of safety and requiring masks. However, the choir and me, I don't know if you, but took a test and it was negative on the same day as our Sunday service. So going forward, fingers crossed that we'll be able to start having coffee hour in person again. I think next week we may actually have it outdoors so that regardless of the positivity rate, we'll be able to socialize afterwards. And you on Zoom, you get to still have your breakout rooms to do virtual coffee hour. Next week, come on back because it's Mother's Day.
Woohoo.
And for the first time in a couple of years, we're going to actually have a child dedication. We're going to dedicate Little Ocean. I'm hoping that Hannah and Mike Rodriguez will come up with harmony. And if there are any other babies or children who you know who would like to be dedicated, this is our version of baptism. We don't think that babies are born sinful and need to be baptized to go to heaven. we believe that every child born is a blessing. And the content of our child dedication ceremony is to bless that blessing and to commit to supporting the family and that child as they grow up. So I hope to see you next week. And if you'll maybe face the aisle, and we're going to sing the UU Blessing song. So you maybe touch the shoulder or in some way connect yourself with someone. And if anyone asks you why you go to church and what Unitarian Universalism is, this is what you can tell them. It's a blessing you were born.
It's a blessing I was born.
And it matters what you do.
And it matters what I do.
What you know about God.
What I know about God
Is a piece of the truth.
is a piece of the truth.
Let the beauty you love
Let the beauty I love
be what you do.
be what I do.
And you don't have to do it alone.
And I don't have to do it alone.
It's a blessing we were born.
It's a blessing we were born.
And it matters what we do.
And it matters what we do.
What we know about God.
What we know about God
Is a piece of the truth.
is a piece of the truth.
Let the beauty we love
Let the beauty we love
be what we do.
be what we do.
And we don't have to do it alone.
And we don't have to do it alone.
We don't have to do it alone.
And we don't have to do it alone. Cha cha cha.
All right, so go now in peace, eat some lunch somewhere. See you next week.